Well, a good evening to you, saints. I am so blessed to come to you live from the River City, San Antonio, Texas, from our Church of Acts Ministries and our online church, House of Many Waters. Welcome every single one of you. Those that might join us later on in the recording. You don't know how blessed I am to be with you tonight. Before I get started on my message, I want to make an invitation to all you ladies. This coming Saturday, what date is that, Gilbert? 27th. This Saturday, 27th, my youngest sister, Deneen Valadez, is going to have a ladies' meeting. One of the guest speakers is none other than Sandra Peña, my sister-in-law, who is mother of the wild bronc, Brandon and Ernie, his brother. She'll be speaking, and here's the theme: why not? All the things we ask God, and God is answering, why not you? Why not now? It's time. So ladies, you are specially invited this Saturday. That's 9965 Cree Wall Road, San Antonio, Texas, for a ladies' meeting, again entitled, Why Not? Now, before I get started on the message, I want to thank every single one of you that has joined in with our family in our prayers for our beautiful niece, Faith Maldonado. She's been in the hospital for a few days now and has really gone through some terrible things physically, but we're just believing that God is faithful. God's going to take her out of there, and she's going to have a testimony again. The reason why I say that is because if you heard me speak about our time of gathering for those 140 days back in 96, she was the young girl that the Lord raised from the dead. So, there's been people praying for the family all over the globe, and I'm not exaggerating. So I want to thank every single one of you that has taken your time to pray for Faith. Continue to do so, and we know that out of it, a diamond in the rough is going to come out. I know what I'm telling you. So thank you all for your time. And lastly, I'm wearing my Borrowed Tomb t-shirt that my brother Michael and his wife Monica Richards, I told them one time, somebody ought to make a t-shirt other than the cross. Everybody wears the cross. But the reality of the beginning is that empty tomb. So I think about a week later, they came and brought me a gift, and it was this t-shirt, and it's called The Empty Tomb. So, you know the story. The Lord had to borrow one because he'd only be dead for 3 days. So I'm wearing this because my dear brother, Henry Porter, that was my associate pastor at that time, gave me a word a few days ago. He said, Pastor, I see the Lord raising you up from the ashes and starting something new in you. So you don't know how blessed I am to be here with you tonight. Okay, sorry for that long intro, but it was well worth it for me. Acts 17, in him we live. Acts 17. Have you ever given thought that though Jesus, you can find it in Romans 8:3, also in 2 Corinthians 5:21, that even though he came in likeness of sinful flesh, he was never ill, never got sick. The disciples never had to get together for a prayer meeting to pray for Jesus. So what was it that the Lord was able to link with, that though he was here around all the elements of the earth, all the storms, everything and anything that man had ever been against or had to battle with, yet he never scratched a finger. Nothing. So think about that. Though he came in the likeness of sinful flesh, which made his flesh totally available to the elements, but he knew that his sustenance, his food, was that of his Father. In John chapter 6, he said, I live because of my Father. I live not only in him, I live by him. And because you are in me, you also shall live through him. And that's amazing. So what I want to do tonight, if you heard what I said about the title, In Him We Live, that should have taken you to Acts chapter 17. Let's go there tonight. So in Acts 17, we find the Apostle Paul. He heard about all these people, all these philosophers getting together, and he saw it as an opportunity to preach the gospel. So when Paul arrives, he's walking around as the Epicureans and the Stoics, all these Greek philosophers, all they're gathering for was to see who had something new. In other words, they were not content by saying, well, okay, we feel we have found the answer. We feel we've come to a conclusion. So now we're satisfied and we'll go from here. No, they were just waiting around. Oh, look who's coming. Let's see what new thing they have to bring. So as they're gathering and conversing, Paul is walking around, and you already know what he found. He's in Mars Hill, and he looks for this particular sign that was there that just popped out to him. And that sign, that reading or writing said, "To the unknown God." I want you to think about that. To the unknown God. Saints, there were all kinds of things that people would stand by, kneel by, worship, talk about, converse on. And yet, why would this one inscription stand out to Paul? To the unknown God. Now, think about it this way. With all of their agreement and disagreement, they couldn't even agree and establish something and say, okay, this is what we believe in. Therefore, from this point, this is what we're going to stand on. Yet, with all the philosophers, all the philosophies, all their traditional believings, all their cultural believings, all their signs, all their markings, different languages, different movements, whatever, out of everything, listen, that they had, they could not come into an agreement. Yet, to that which they did not know, they agreed upon. To the unknown God. I hope you caught what I just said. They have all these books, all this material. And they're like, well, this one was pretty good. Oh, I read that one. That one was amazing. But they could not conclude and say, okay, this is what we're going to stand on now. This is our basis. Yet, they make an inscription to the unknown God. Excuse me. So Paul picks it up. He said, this is my vocal point right here. This is what I'm shooting for. To the unknown God. So when Paul writes, let's just pick it up there real quick in verse 23. For as I was passing through and considering the objects, look now, the objects of your worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, to the unknown God. Therefore, in other words, because of this inscription, the one whom you worship without knowing him, I now proclaim to you. Now, saints, I have read this for 42 years. And as I was sitting, just listening to the words again, I began to think in this direction. You don't know who he is, yet you know that he is. He's someone, he's something, he's somewhere doing who knows what, but nevertheless, there is an unknown God. Now think about this. Don't let your mind just run off. Think about what I'm declaring to you tonight. How is it that these philosophers, the Epicureans, the Stoics, that, the Epicureans, they were in the luxurious things. Oh, that'd have been great today in this prosperity movement. They'd have loved it. But that's neither here nor there. But Paul is saying, he's going around and he's seeing these statues and all these different articles, and he goes, well, what do you know? They're worshiping my God. The God that I want to come and present to them, they're worshiping him and don't even know it. So Paul says, man, I got my statue right here. This is it. I mean, you know how people are. They have a saint to go to for different things. If they're in need of money, they buy a particular candle. And I'm not making fun of anybody, judging anybody. I'm just telling you a fact. Go down the aisle of H-E-B, and there's everybody and their grandson on a candle. And this one is for this one. This is for that one. If the Spurs go to the finals, you light this candle for the Spurs. I mean, there's all objects of worship, because people believe that these things somehow can respond to you in any particular way. Therefore, to them, hey, even if it works a little bit, anything for the hope of the thing. So, he gets this inscription and he picks it out and says, I've come today to talk to you about the one that you worship without even knowing. So my question is, why are they worshiping an unknown God? Well, let me ask you this. In Genesis 1:26, and I've used this verse so many times, God says, now that everything is created, and everything has been created after its own kind to produce itself, multiply itself, promote itself, show itself after its own kind. Now that that is settled, every tree-bearing fruit, it'll be after its own kind. Every animal after its own kind. So now that that's established, now with that law of first mention, now let us create man after our own kind, in likeness and in image. Now don't let me lose you. I just gave you the answer of why people light candles. I just gave you the answer why people bow in front of statues, go and bow before the cross, go put their ashes on, go and partake of communion, why they give or they go and pay to light a candle, why they drive all the way down to Mexico and go. My mom did it. We had my brother who passed away a little over a year ago, who my mom went down, and soon they get out the car, get on their knees and start walking on their knees, scraping their knees to the, down to the flesh, just hoping that God would see what they're doing, hear what they're declaring, and answer them. I've seen it happen. These are things that through my culture of what I come out of, I saw these things. The breaking of the eggs in a glass, because someone was somehow demonly possessed, or somebody said something and cursed them. I lived through it. I've seen a lot in almost 70 years. But you finally come to the understanding that everything that man has ever done is in one way or another measured by a form of worshiping God that to them is still unknown. That's the only way they know Him. That's how they've been taught to know Him. That's what they've been told to follow Him. I mean, I've got family members of mine that have been through divorces and have been remarried, and in their particular religion, they're not allowed to partake of communion because they're living with their second maiden. It's not their wife. That's what their religion teaches them. And to me, I asked them, well, why would you stay there if you can't partake of communion because you've been divorced? God forgives all sins. But that's all that they know. So that's why this sign, this inscription that Paul saw was so powerful. He said, there's my sermon right there. I'm going to preach to you and about the unknown God. Why is He God to you and you don't even know Him? To what magnitude do you believe that He is God? How much of a profoundness is in this God that you worship without knowing? So, saints, this really opened up my eyes to see things differently. And of course, when you first come to know the Lord, you get very, very religious, very, how can I say, very prejudiced towards those that don't believe your way. I mean, I would not go into a building that would have statues because the scripture says, don't place yourself around idols. So I would not go. We had a family funeral. I'd wait outside. It could be 105 degrees. outside, and I'd be outside waiting. And my loved ones would come and say, why aren't you coming in? No, there's idols in there. I ain't going in there. That's what the Bible says. Now, of course, I don't do that anymore. I've come to, understanding. But what I'm trying to tell you, saints, is that look at what the apostle picked up. He's saying, okay, you're saying he's unknown to you, and the one that's unknown to you is the very one that I've come to speak of, because the one that's unknown to you, I know him. And I've come to declare him. So with that, look there in verse 24. God, he's talking about the unknown God to them, God who made the world and everything in it, since he is Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell in temples made with hands. Saints, you don't have enough money to build a building to place God in. He wouldn't fit. The heavens and the earth were within him. I know we say, God's in heaven. No, the heavens were within him. And you're going to build a temple of 50,000 to fit God? You're wasting your time and your money. Then he says there in verse 25, nor is he worshipped with men's hands as though he needed anything, since he gives to all life, breath, and all things. And he has made from one blood, listen to this. Man, would this stop so many wars? Just the reality of this one verse. And he has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on all the face of the earth, and has determined their pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their dwellings. I started thinking of the days of David. David, you're going to take this land. That land was their land, but to begin with, it was my land. You're going to take it back. And David would go in obedience. Boom. Gideon. What about Gideon? Started off with, 20, 30,000? God said, no, knock it down. And he knocked it down to 300. Man, where are the 300? We need churches of 300. Those that nothing else matters but their hands in the pierced hands of a living God. But these men like David would go and overtake what rightfully belonged to God to begin with. So when we look at this, here's what I want you to catch tonight. Within every human being, does not matter the state. They can be in a state right now filled with all kinds of narcotics, alcoholism, and their bodies may look like dead men's bones. Doesn't matter. Within that vessel, how grave of a situation they may be in, they may be near the grave, almost ready to die. Within that vessel is still the breath of God. And it's the breath of God that's holding them together. Now, maybe they have brought destruction upon themselves by things that never, ever they should have ever partaken of. Nonetheless, in Him we live, we move, and we have our being. Whether you're Asian, you're Oriental, doesn't matter, saints. All of us come from the same blood. Well, Pastor, how can you prove that? Colossians 1:15. He is the firstborn of all creation. So when a man or a woman is born again, we follow suit of that same bloodline. Now, let me get back on track here. So, our likeness and image comes from God. I like what James 2:19 says. You believe there's one God, and you do well. But even the demons believe and tremble. In other words, even the demons are struck with fear and are even horrified. These men wrote an inscription to the unknown God. And the reason why I said James 2:19 is because even the demonic, even they are horrified because even they believe and know. Who do you think threw him out? They know him. And they know him well. And they're horrified, not just by him, but they are horrified by those that know him as well. That's a whole nother teaching. So I want you to hear me out. You know, it's awesome when you find someone that speaks of his profoundness, his majesty, his glory. But even the people that are in the demonic realm, even those that are in the satanic realm, witches, warlocks, look at some of the things that they prepare in tattoos, things that are upside down. Why would you make it upside down? Why are you so fearful of it? Have you thought about these things? What makes people do what they do? Because deep within the depth of their soul, regardless of how dark they are bound by, I've said this before, they have concluded that even in the darkest of darkness, light still exists. You can't snuff light out. It is impossible because God is the light of the world. Jesus said, I am the light of the world. So that means that if he calls us the light, that we can go into the darkest area of darkness and still bring a light of deliverance to that scenario. But we don't believe it. So, what I just said, look at their images, their signs, their markings, their spiritual applications, their languages, their forms. All of these things, where did that come from? That of making some type of idol, where did that come from? You go back to the time when they were in Egypt for those 400 years. Finally they come out, the so-called, back then, man of God, Moses, wasn't coming down. So he came to Aaron. Aaron, do something. Well, all right, bring me your gold and your silver. And he makes that bronze calf. Where do you get that from? From the gods of Egypt. But think about it. What was Aaron doing? He was trying to bring worship to God so that God would answer Israel. It was a form of worship. It was wrong. The whole calf thing was wrong. Aaron's direction was wrong. But the reason behind it was they wanted to hear what God had to say. Because Moses went up to Mount Sinai, and Moses was in heaven. Man, he was seeing the back parts of God. He was worshiping. I mean, the lightning didn't bother him. The thunder, the fire, the smoke. He was in heaven. The man was having church. The people down here at the bottom of the mountain were experiencing hell. So Aaron makes it. And the people went into a deep, deep lust out in the streets. So there's power to worship. But are you worshiping the known God who sits on the throne? You know, people wonder why their lives are so abused, or why their lives are so, imbalanced. What are you worshiping? Well, Pastor, I'm not worshiping what Aaron did. No, but is there a form? Is there something there that's relating to it? It could be money. It could be fame. Authority. A man tried to buy authority in Scripture. Could be anything. But where does that come from? It comes from within. You and I have been created by the will of God to be a people of worship. To worship the living God. He created us to be that way, to be like Him, in likeness and in image. But we think, oh, well, this is my life. There's a key right there. This is why some people go through some of the things that they experience in their life, because they've declared, this is my life and I do with it what I desire. Well, there's your problem. You don't need prayer. You don't need the laying on of hands. You don't need a prophetic word. You need to come to your senses. You're out of your mind. So, we look at all these things. Again, the languages, the forms, all of these things that are wrong, but even though they're wrong, I want you to put that aside. Where does it come from? From the very fabric of your DNA. I want us to go tonight to Romans chapter 1. We're already there in the book of Acts. Let's go to Romans chapter 1 real quick. I want to share some words with you, starting in verse 19. Saying this is so important. I want to thank my sister Angie for this energy, tropical, citrus, well satisfying with caffeine drink. Thank you, Angie. Whatever it costs you, may the Lord repay you. Oh, she's here. In fact, I think Angie is the longest lasting family member of this ministry. I don't like to use member, but family member I do like to use. And she is so faithful. Man, with just 50 more faithful like her, we'd have hallelujah night every time we got together. Romans 1:16. Hear me out. Well, you know what? Let's go to verse 19. The other verses are good, but let's start at verse 19. Romans 1:19. Because what may be known of God. Did you hear that? What may be known. What do we start off with? Acts 17:23. To the unknown God. So now we're reading Paul again. Because what may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has shown it to them. Wow. In other words, there's really no acceptable excuse to miss who the person of God is. It's in your DNA. It's already placed there. We go through discipleship and mentorship and leadership, all these things. But in reality, if a man or a woman would just sit there and say, okay, Lord, I come from you. If you are my Father, then speak to me. Because before I was made in this legal body, I was spirit. Now, according to John 4:24, you are spirit. So if you are spirit, speak to my spirit, and that which is already within me, awaken it so that I may worship you in spirit and in truth. I hope you're listening, saints. Before I was in this body, I was spirit. God gave me a legal body, like He gave Jesus a legal body to be on this earth. So we're spirit first, then with a body. Excuse me. But our body will die, but our spirit will not. Our spirit is eternal. Therefore, according to this, that which man is looking for, if someone's traveled 20,000 miles around the globe to look for God, they wasted 20,000 miles of travel. He's right here. That which can be known of Him is already within them. Now look, and He takes us back to Genesis. For since the creation, He's talking about Adam and Eve. You need to catch that. So, for since the creation of the world, His invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even the things that are made. The atmosphere, the trees, you name it, the things that are made, even His eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. I told you in Colossians chapter 1, He is the firstborn of all creation. You continue to read, and everything is exhibited by him, the first creation. Everything follows suit. Everything comes after Jesus. Everything follows him. He's the rule of thumb, so to speak. Here's the rule of thumb. It's Christ. And after Christ, everything follows suit. All of creation. That's amazing. So the rule of thumb for everything now gives you the hope in what you're seeing. You know, you don't see the wind, yet you feel it passing by. All of those things are crying out loudly, massively, profoundly. There is a God who loves you and calls you his child. Oh, saints. So, since creation, the Godhead should be seen everywhere. Colossians 2:9. In him dwelt what? The fullness. The fullness of what? Of the Godhead bodily. The Father, Son, and Spirit. In him. So in him, they were rejecting him, saying that he was moving by the spirit of Beelzebub, and that was the Godhead. Because in him dwelt the fullness of the Godhead. Look how wise man became. The Pharisees, Sadducees, Herodians, scribes, they all got so wise in their own minds that the very one that had the fullness of the Godhead in bodily form, they said was moving in a devilish way. Man, how far man has gone from the truth. Then, verse 21, because although, man is so important, because although they knew God, again, that's Adam and Eve, they knew God. Remember when it says, remember when Mary said, how can it be for me to have a child if I know no man? Because that's relationship. So Adam finally knew Eve, his wife. That talks about something in a very relational way. So, because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, in their foolish hearts. They were darkened. In other words, let me put it this way, and I want you to catch this. When man rejects God, and he can, it's called the will. God did not want to program you where you had to bring him your worship. God's the real thing. His love is alive. His love is real. Doesn't want to force you to come to him. What I just read to you basically says this. When man thinks, I don't need God. I'm my own God. You're going to worship something. And for you to say, I don't need God, I got myself, you just entered into worship. You're worshiping yourself. You don't look at it that way, but Well, that's how foolish you become. But it says here that it became futile and foolish in their minds. In other words, they became empty. Saints, I don't know the measurement. I don't know the calculation. But I will tell you this. If there was any way possible, and there might be, I might be ignorant of it, to calculate that which we are possible to do, we would be blown out of our minds. But yet it says that we have the capability of having the mind of Christ. So therefore, I guess there is some sort of direction of measurement of what we're capable of. I mean, look throughout the scriptures. In those days, in those times, the things that they came up with. Where did they come up with those things? The wisdom of Solomon. My goodness. We have a quarrel with these two mothers. What's the quarrel about? About a baby. They're both saying the baby belongs to them. All right, let's take care of this thing. Bring me the baby. Just cut it in half. Give one to this mama, the other half to this mama. Everybody satisfied? Everybody go home and have lunch. Well, who's going to come forth and speak up? The real mama. No, Lord, don't kill the child. Let her take it. She would rather have another woman raise her child than to see it killed. And Solomon's wisdom said, there is your mama. That's wisdom, brother. But notice here, they were not thankful. They became futile or in vain. Their thoughts, their foolish hearts were darkened. When man thinks he's achieved a certain plateau of wisdom, he has just become emptier. Did you hear what I said? Man's measurement of so-called thoughts, that he's a genius, simply shows how he has emptied himself out to foolishness. And I'll tell you what, there's sometimes that God's going to ask you to do some foolish stuff. I'll never forget this one woman that said, Lord, just, I want to be guided by your Spirit. Just show me where to go, what to do, and I'll do whatever, Lord. I'm your daughter. Whatever you want me to do, I'm there. You got my attention. So let's just stop at this convenience store. Get off and put your legs up on the wall and stand on your hands. Say, Lord, what is that going to do? So you said you would do whatever I told you to do. At that same time, there was a man inside that store that saw the woman put herself upside down against a wall. He comes out and says, woman, why are you doing such a crazy thing? He said, I don't know. My God told me to do it. And he has a purpose for everything. Therefore, whatever the purpose was, so be it. He said, look, just this morning, I told God, if you're really real, let me see a woman stand upside down next to a wall, and I'll know there's a God. And that man was totally satisfied with his answer. Oh my goodness. I'm telling you, saying back in 96, when we had that renewal, I don't know what you want to call it, revival, renewal, call it what you want, it was. Crazy stuff happened here. Shaking people, almost out of their clothing. Crazy stuff. My brother-in-law, Andy, he was a crazy man for God. And man, some of the things that God told him to do, we laugh at it now, but back then, man, we were like, what was that about? People were getting healed, set free, never the same again. But as men claim to become more wise, they only become more foolish because they didn't know God. Verse 22, professing to be wise, they became fools. Changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like corruptible man, birds, four-footed animals, creeping things. Therefore God also gave them up to uncleanliness in the lust of their hearts, to dishonor their bodies among themselves. So now, Pastor, I have a hard time with that verse. No, to clarify. It's called a free will. Here's the thing about will. When you say, okay, look, from this point on, I'm going to live regardless of what I know, what I've come to know, what I've come to understand, what I've come to be stable, constant, I'm going to live according to this particular thing that coincides with my will for my life. Here's the problem, the major problem with that. When a man or a woman begin to live according to their will, there is no limit in what they're entering into on how deep it'll take them. And you're not God that you can stop it. I pray you heard that. Therefore, these things here in Romans 1:19 to 25, what may be known of God is manifest in them. For God has shown it to them through the DNA, to the image. His invisible attributes are clearly seen by being understood by the things that are made. Thirdly, even his eternal power and Godhead. Fourthly, they knew God, but did not glorify him as God, and therefore had a change of mind. The only change of mind that I would love to have completely is for God to change the mind that I came up with on my own that was never his to begin with. That's the mind that I want changed. So, saints, I want to thank you for listening. Forgive me for my coughing. I'm telling you, there's excitement growing around here. The people that God had stirred up at one time are being awakened in one sense or another. And this past, I guess it was Saturday morning, about 3 o'clock to about 6 o'clock, I was pressing in for my niece, Faith. And I was pressing in. And all of a sudden, my body started going through vomiting. And I was vomiting all day Saturday, all the way through Sunday. My wife said, honey, with your previous condition and all, I may have to take you to the hospital because you're getting weaker. I said, no, let's just wait. I want to preach Sunday morning. And she goes, you can't preach that way, honey. You're too weak. I said, well, let's see. I just don't want to go back to hospital. Well, it wouldn't stop. And then all of a sudden, this vertigo thing hit me. I called Brother Mario about, it must have been about 3 o'clock in the morning. I said, Mario, I need you to pray, brother. I need you to stand with me. I'm going through this imbalance thing. I can't even stand up. But I have to go to the bathroom to throw up. My wife has to grab me by the hand. I can't even walk. So this thing I know is on the way to the hospital, which I did not want to do. I'm not saying if you go to the hospital, you're not a man of faith or a woman of faith. And I was sitting there watching the old revivals of A.A. Allen, Jack Coe, Catherine Kuhlman, Maria Woodworth Etter, all these people, man. I was getting pumped up, and I was still feeling horrible. I just kept pressing in. So they finally let me go from the hospital and got back out Sunday morning. But this vertigo thing, where my wife had if you've been here before, I live here on the grounds, on the 10 acres. She had to grab me by the hand like a child to walk me over here because my balance is all over the place. That's why I'm sitting in this chair to balance me out tonight. So just keep me in your prayers. I'm not, I'm not asking you to boo-hoo, Pastor. Oh, poor Pastor. No, man. I'm telling you, I ain't afraid of dying. I am not afraid of death. That's why Jesus only borrowed a tomb. He ain't there, people. They couldn't kill him. He wouldn't die. The man just would not die. But that's a message in itself that I don't have time to get into. Why? If Jesus came in the likeness of sinful flesh, why is it that he never had a stomach ache, a headache, a pain of, man, guys, let's rest for a little bit. We've been walking now for 3 years, man. I mean, I'm getting tired. Aren't you tired, Peter? How about you, John? How do you feel? That was never his vocabulary. So that's another message. But thank you so much for listening. Just send this to someone that you might think may need it. So remember, well, Pastor, what about all this stuff you've been preaching? Oh, it's all true. Scripture says, no weapon formed against you shall prosper. Now read it slowly. No weapon, what? Formed. So that means that there are things forming against you, but they shall not prosper. Now when you have to have something for it to prosper. So there's things at times that come against us, but God will not let it prosper because he'll intervene. So there are things that come against us. Are you with me? I don't want to confuse you, but the things that the enemy wants to form against you, he'll form them, but you have the authority to cut them down. But as they're trying to prosper, to get in deep with roots, God says, no. That's my son. That's my daughter. They are citizens of the kingdom, of the government of heaven. Therefore, take your hand off. So don't worry about me. Say a prayer for me. I'll take it. But know this. My God lives. Because he lives, in him I live. I move and have my being. God bless y'all. Till, Wednesday? Sunday morning, Church of Acts, 11 o'clock worship, and we'll start the word right about noon. God bless you, saints.